So that's what our boat looks like under sail. Under sail. This means they put us on the tender, and they put the sails up. And now if you look to the right is to the west, that means the boat is going south right now, right? Yeah. But it's barely moving. But that's about the velocity or the speed you would get if you had to go down the river on the sail, because you've got the river coming the other way, and the sail's barely full of air. So we went around a couple of times and all took lots of pictures and got back. The next day we stopped at a farm, or farm island. 500 people live on this island. They take boats to the schools on the main island. There's like an elementary school on the island with the higher levels of school. Kids went next over there. We met a farmer there. This is Bisaw Island. This is Syed. His house is behind him, rather. It's about 1,600 square feet. So a whole entire lodge in Breckenridge.
Three families.
Pardon me?
3 families. Him and his brother.
Oh, yeah. So it wasn't just his family.
Or parents.
But we had lunch with them, and a bottle of water, and everything was cooked. So things that were cooked in bottled water, they used bottled water. So you're pretty safe in this kind of scenes. And our guide is there in the back. And he took us around, and Beth got the knife and cut bananas and stuff like that. We worked hard that day. And now we're going to go to the Edfu Temple. This is built in between 250 BC, 200 BC, and 50 BC. So over a long period of time. They believed that the temple was inhabited by Horus, the falcon-headed god. So there's a lot of falcon statues around inside. But it is the second largest temple. So it's a lot of real estate, but this is the day we took the horse and buggy ride. So the scale is, there are a couple people down at the bottom there. The scale of all these places is just enormous. Colonnades, and then carvings with various orders. And our Nile trip is winding up. So this is the crew. There were 6 or 8 people between the cooks on board, and it was actually a cooking lesson one day that Beth took. And one of the women in our group who was from France, and she used to have a cooking TV show in France. So she was very interested in learning about that too. Yeah. So morning picture, depart, and we did a lot this day. Valley of the Kings. This is, there's 3 punches there in this ticket, because this is good for 3 tombs, as it says up at the top. So there's a lot of tombs in the valley, and they rotate which ones are available to go through, basically. So I'll show you a couple of ones. This is what Valley of the Kings looks like when you walk into it, hot and dry. Now, bear with me here. I'm going to try and show it. Let's see if this works. Okay. Now, so does that make sense to people? The top was the valley, and these are the tombs. Can you do that again? Okay, so they're long and skinny into the ground underneath the valley. And they had this model out in the museum. So here's one for Ramses IX. And the entrance is over here, and the actual burial chamber, which is a little sunken chamber thing down here at the bottom. And then all along the walls are decorated, and then some of the tombs may have rooms off to the side. And basically sometime early in your reign, they start building your tomb. Because sooner or later, you're gonna die. And it's sort of like how long you reigned for how nice your tomb is. So Ramses IX, we don't have a note about how long he was there, but that's his tomb. And going into the tomb, you have a long hallway with carving down the sides, and this is long. And of course, the plastic used to keep from writing a name on it or something. And you get all the way to the end, and you can kind of see the sunken chamber that we're sitting the other man down there. Back. And yeah, and there's lots of signs and indications of what in particular is represented in some of these things. I'm not going to try and explain to you. You know, there's a certain panel, and that represents a certain part of the history or a certain worshiping of the gods. So it was 240 to go to 3 tombs. King Tut, 300 on his own. Popular god, big money maker, right? All around the world. Even though it's one of the less decorated tombs because he died at 19. And his cause of death is kind of vague. Some say it was in a chariot accident. Some say he had a club foot, he couldn't have ridden a chariot or driven a chariot. Head wound. You know, they've got his mummy, so they can look at that. But so in 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered this tomb, and we'll see something about it. But yeah, this was an undisturbed tomb. A number of these tombs have been open, or they knew where they were since antiquity. There was rubble in the hallways and nobody bothered to excavate some of them. That's good because it kept the artwork in better shape. But this was the one. The reason he's so famous because it was just rooms full of gold and treasures and whatnot, and they could take it all out at once. When you say at once, it was like 2 or 3 years because they did everything really slowly to make sure they didn't mess it up on the way. So there's our Beth waiting to go in. There's not much decoration, so when you get to the end, you see King Tut. And on the right is King Tut's Tootsies. It's Beth's show.
I got a close-up of this.
And yeah, she posted a close-up on Facebook. Not of his head. He's not actually one of the better preserved mummies. They weren't great at it when he died, of the preservation. Some of the ones we saw in the museum later, that was an area we weren't allowed to take pictures, in Cairo, they were like, well, they look pretty good. You know, this was a handsome person. He looks like a dead guy,
Yeah.
very much. But then we went on to Ramses III, and you can see that this one, they went down and they ran into, for some reason they diverted sideways because there was another tomb that they got into over here, and then they went down and they built a whole lot of rooms here, and then they built a big, when you see the chamber, how big this space is. You know, there's rooms off to the sides of this. This is a ramp going down to an area that's where the mummy and so forth were. It's not all that interesting, but then this is a floor up top here that goes off into another room that's behind this column. So lots of decoration because he was pharaoh for a long time. So this is still the same day we left the boat, because now we're going to go to the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. This was an easy one because she says 3 words, Hatshepsut. This isn't where she's buried. This is where they prepared her to be buried. Right? And it took, let's see, she ruled for 20 years, and she was one of the most successful pharaohs, one of the 2 female pharaohs. And she was behind the throne for a long time, basically. So, I mean, So she outlived people. So when it came her time, they had already prepared all this to prepare her for the afterlife. So this was built between her 7th and 20th year, so 13 years of building this. And this was so hot. How hot was it?
Oh, yes.
Best stayed in the bus. Because you had to walk from way over there to way up there. And she said, I'll be there.
Jim, you're going to see us.
And there's really not that, there's a lot of rooms on the face, but this doesn't go deep into the mountains. If you look up there, these statues are these guys. So it's pretty big. But I mentioned earlier that sometimes in the shaded areas, you can see quite colorful representations of from a long time ago. There's E for scale with an umbrella in the sun and the wet rag around my neck. So from here, we go to our second most famous hotel. This is the Winter Palace. It's not like they have winter, but they have a palace, so they had to call it something. This was built in 1905. It wasn't constructed by Thomas Cook, but it was basically buddies of his that built this to be, it's right on the Nile. This was used in the 2004 death on the Nile with David Suchet in some of the rooms here. This hotel, I'll get a little further, say something more about it. This is our room up there, overlooking the Nile. When we came out on our porch, that's the view you saw, but the reason you can't see much of the Nile is because all the way back there is Hatshepsut's temple, or mortuary temple. So the Valley of the Kings is actually on the other side of this sort of first range. But in this hotel, on a balcony inside the lobby, this is where Howard Carter announced the discovery of King Tut's tomb. Lots of famous guests have been there. The royal suite that was down below us and over a bit, I noticed there was a guard sitting outside of that room the next day, and then this couple left. Okay, wow, that's George Clooney. No, it wasn't. But later I asked the hotel manager, so who was staying there? An important Italian businessman. Okay. His wife was there. It's sunset, still the same day. We're going to go see the Luxor Temple. There's two big famous temples in Luxor, this and Karnak. We'll go to Karnak tomorrow. But this was the center of power for 1,500 years. So lots of people added lots of things over a long period of time. It was largely built by Ramses II, remember the guy with the big statues of himself, and Amenhotep III. And let's go on. This is the Avenue of the Sphinxes, and you can see them on either side all the way down. This is more than a mile of Sphinxes, all the way down. And while we were there was construction going on in the main areas. You can see some guys working down here and building steps and all. The president of Egypt is going to, or your president, here which he is. Anyway, he was going to visit in a couple weeks to dedicate the Avenue of the Sphinxes because it had been cleaned up and rebuilt and all, and put the Sphinxes back on the pedestals and all. In a couple weeks. They were still cleaning up the Sphinxes. There's like hundreds of them. Like, they got to get to work putting them back on the pedestals because a lot of the pedestals you saw some Sphinxes, but there were a lot of empty ones too. But sunset was really cool because they started lighting everything up. There's a big space. And the wood at the bottom is where the building stage is for things. If you've ever seen the production, it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they moved mummies from one museum to another one. They moved 21 mummies. And if you go on YouTube and say, Mummy Parade, it's this huge production with these big vehicles and lots of women dressed in outfits and men dressed in outfits, marching with lights and music and everything through Cairo. When you have spaces like this, when you have just, well, the residents who have dedicated some spaces, let's go for it. Really, look at it. To get back to the front of it, but now it's dark, so that was cool. So this day's kind of long. Let's get up really early in the morning and go for a balloon ride. So now we're up before sunrise and taking off in the balloons. Great fun. This, we're back to Edfu Temple back there. Hatshepsut.
This was the Valley of the Queens.
The Valley of the Queens is actually sort of off to this side, to the left side. And we did float over that, but it's not very picturesque because it's sort of a bunch of holes in the ground. It looks like a mining area in Colorado. Go that far. But we did pass over that, as pointed out. The Valley of the Kings, as I mentioned, is like is right over here. So this is all sandstone areas, and it's easy to drill holes and make temples and monuments and so forth. This is an unrestored area. So this is a place that they built these things for thousands of years. You can't fix all of them up at once. If you've been to some place like Turkey, they have temples that the tourists go visit, and then they have the ones that are under renovation, whatever you may call it. Or the British or the Germans or somebody take all the good stuff back to the museums. The British Museum has a number of hundreds of things that they took from Egypt 100 years ago. So that's a full view of the Winter Palace. In the foreground is this is a royal barge that they're building for the